The moment Todd Tucker demanded DNA tests for the children he raised, the courtroom gasped. But that wasn't even the worst part. What Kandi pulled from her phone 30 minutes later didn't just destroy his case. It destroyed the entire image he'd spent a decade building. 15 seconds, his own voice. And suddenly, everything Mama Joyce warned about years ago made perfect sense. This is the recording Bravo never aired, and once you hear what it revealed, you'll never look at their marriage the same way again. For months, the world thought Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker were handling their separation with grace, respectfully, like two adults who simply grew apart. But the moment the court doors closed and the real proceedings began, that illusion didn't just crack, it exploded. What started as a quiet filing on November 21, 2025 became one of the most shocking, most devastating, most publicly dissected divorce battles reality television has ever witnessed. And here's what makes this different from every other celebrity breakup you've seen. This wasn't about love dying. This was about intentions being exposed, about masks falling, about a strategy collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Because when Todd Tucker filed his response, he didn't just ask for custody or support, he challenged the very foundation of their marriage agreement, and that's when Kandi pulled out a weapon he never saw coming. A recording, hidden, locked away for years, 15 seconds that would dismantle everything. But before we get to that moment, the moment that changed everything, you need to understand how deep this fracture really went. Because this story doesn't begin with a filing. It begins years earlier in the quiet spaces between camera cuts, in the tensions that built slowly, invisibly, until they became too heavy to ignore. November 21st, 2025. The filing hit the clerk's desk with no fanfare, no press conference, no tearful Instagram post. Just paperwork. Clean, final, quiet. But that quietness wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes right before an earthquake. The kind that means someone has been preparing, planning, gathering evidence while everyone else assumed things would somehow work themselves out. People close to the couple had whispered for years that tension was building, but nobody expected it to rupture with this kind of force. What looked like a respectful separation transformed overnight into a courtroom war zone, and there was no returning to the narrative either of them had once tried to protect. The first hearing made it clear this wasn't going to be a polite walk away. Todd Tucker entered that courtroom with a face that wasn't heartbroken. It was determined. His lawyers came prepared with thick folders, sharpened arguments, and a strategy colder than the marble floors beneath them. When the judge asked for preliminary motions, Todd's side didn't hesitate. They came out swinging, full custody of the children. Spousal support, child support, and the nuclear option, an immediate challenge to the prenuptial agreement. It landed like a bomb, not because these demands were unusual in high-profile divorces, but because of how quickly they came. As if they weren't reactions to Kandi's filing, as if they were blueprints. Plans that had been sitting in a drawer, waiting for the right moment to be activated. And that moment was the second Kandi filed first. Todd claimed he'd been pressured into signing the prenup one day before the wedding. No lawyer present, no time to think, no real choice. He used words designed to trigger courtroom sympathy. Forced, manipulated, cornered, unfair. His voice carried practiced disappointment, but not a trace of genuine vulnerability. He wasn't emotional, he was tactical, as if this wasn't a confession. It was step one of a calculated plan. And while Todd spoke, the judge's eyes kept drifting back to Kandi, not because she interrupted, not because she reacted dramatically, but because she didn't react at all. No shaking head, no tears, no gasps. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes from someone who didn't file out of rage, but out of exhaustion, out of clarity, out of finality. The courtroom atmosphere shifted when the judge asked whether the prenup had been discussed privately before the wedding. Todd's legal team leaned hard into the pressure narrative. They painted a portrait of a groom backed into a corner by a superstar bride, a man without equal footing, without representation, without protection. A man who signed something he didn't fully understand because he was told it was necessary. And that's when things started to unravel. because as the hearings continued, the courtroom became a vault cracking open. Secrets that had been buried under years of family dinners, vacation photos, red carpet smiles, and carefully edited reality TV moments came spilling out, not in whispers, in transcripts, in testimony, in arguments that sounded less like marital disputes and more like archaeological excavation. One witness raised the infamous Portia situation, the alleged threesome conversation that had rocked Bravo fans years ago. Suddenly, an old rumor became official courtroom content. An attorney read portions of the discussion aloud. The judge's expression tightened. Kandi's hands went still on the table. Todd's jaw locked. Even if the story had been exaggerated or misremembered over time, the fact that it resurfaced at all told the judge something critical. This marriage had fractures long before November 2025, and it didn't stop there. Todd's team brought up rumors of Kandi's alleged affair, whispers that had lived on gossip blogs but had never been spoken in front of a judge. Kandi didn't flinch, but her lawyer did. Not out of fear. Out of disgust. The tactic was transparent. Muddy the waters enough so the judge couldn't see who was actually swimming toward an unfair advantage. Then came the part that scorched the room. Mama Joyce, her name alone shifted the energy. Lawyers exchanged glances. Even the court reporter seemed to pause. Todd's team accused Kandi's mother of years of toxic interference. They played old interview clips, showed reunion footage, dug up every moment Mama Joyce had questioned Todd's intentions. Every doubt she'd ever voiced was subtly presented as evidence of bias, manipulation, and pressure. But Kandi's side countered with something harsher. Mama Joyce didn't distrust Todd because of ego or possessiveness. She doubted him because she sensed something deeper, something that didn't smell like partnership. Something that tasted like opportunity. And that word opportunity hung over Todd like smoke. He couldn't escape. The tension escalated when Kandi Burruss and Kayla Tucker became part of the proceedings. Two daughters, one courtroom, years of blended family wounds laid bare for strangers to witness. Riley spoke quietly, without theatrics. She said Todd never treated her like a daughter, that he always compared her to Kayla, that she felt like an outsider in a home that was supposed to feel safe. Kayla fired back emotionally, claiming Kandi never fully embraced her as family, that she always felt like a guest, not a daughter. The argument wasn't loud, but it was raw. Real hurt, real distance, real proof that the household had been divided long before any paperwork was filed. The judge eventually cut them off, but not before absorbing the truth behind their voices. This wasn't a unified home breaking apart. It was a fractured one finally admitting its cracks. And then, as if the atmosphere wasn't already suffocating, Todd made the most devastating request of all: DNA tests for Ace and Blaze. The gasp in the courtroom wasn't theatrical. It was instinctive. Even the judge's expression tightened. Kandi inhaled sharply, like the words had physically struck her. Her lawyer slammed a file shut in disbelief. Todd didn't look at her, didn't look at the judge. He stared straight ahead as if refusing to face the emotional wreckage of what he'd just said. It was the lowest blow of the entire case, and it changed everything. Because the moment Todd questioned the paternity of the children he'd raised, children who called him father, who trusted him, who loved him, sympathy evaporated. Neutrality dissolved. This wasn't legal strategy anymore. This was cruelty disguised as procedure. But the most shocking moment, the moment that would be replayed across every platform, every gossip site, every social media thread, came during the final hearing. Todd's lawyer repeated the same claim for what felt like the 100th time. The prenup was signed under pressure. No legal counsel. No real consent. He said it cleanly, confidently, as if it were the strongest pillar of their entire case. And then the judge turned to Kandi with a simple question. "You have any evidence to counter this claim?" She nodded once, unlocked her phone, opened a hidden folder, tapped a file that had never seen daylight. A video filled the courtroom speakers. Todd's voice? Calm, smooth, clear. "I'm good. I want to sign this. No pressure. I love you. I'm doing the right thing." The silence that followed was suffocating. Todd's face drained of color. His lawyer's pen slipped from his fingers. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed in concentration. Everything Todd had claimed for months, every accusation of pressure, every narrative of victimhood, disintegrated in 15 seconds. When the judge finally spoke, the decision wasn't dramatic. It was concise. Divorce, finalized. No applause, no arguments, just the end. The prenup challenge collapsed. Custody remained with Kandi. The children stayed in her care. Outside the courthouse, the public didn't wait for official statements. They'd seen the video. They'd heard the demands. They remembered the DNA request. They remembered Mama Joyce's warnings from years ago. And they knew one truth that echoed louder than any legal ruling. This wasn't heartbreak. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't vulnerability. This was strategy. And it finally got caught. The shock of that courtroom video didn't fade. It spread slowly, sharply, like a crack moving across glass that was already under too much pressure. What happened after the divorce was finalized wasn't closure. It was fallout, the kind that doesn't come from anger but from revelation. Because once that judge stamped the file, every foundation Todd had built his case on started collapsing in real time. The moment Kandi walked out of the courthouse, cameras flashed. But she didn't stop, she didn't speak, she didn't defend or celebrate. She didn't even look around. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was proof that the war had cost her more than she'd ever admit publicly. Her face didn't show revenge. It showed exhaustion. Betrayal that had grown so old it no longer stung. It just weighed. Todd walked out minutes later, eyes burning, jaw locked, hands shaking. Not because the marriage ended, but because the control had slipped from his hands in front of witnesses, lawyers, reporters, and a judge who no longer believed him. He didn't lose a spouse that day. He lost credibility, and he knew it. But the most brutal part wasn't what happened inside the courtroom. It was what happened after. In conference rooms, in online forums, in leaked whispers, in family arguments that spilled past closed doors, in fans dissecting every old episode, every shady comment, every quiet moment caught on camera years earlier. Suddenly, everything Todd ever joked about didn't sound like jokes anymore. Everything he ever claimed sounded rehearsed. Everything he ever did looked timed. The first explosion came when insiders revealed that the DNA test demand wasn't a spontaneous courtroom outburst. It had been drafted, discussed, prepared, typed into an official legal document before the hearing even started. People didn't want to believe it at first, but when the paperwork surfaced confirming the request had been planned, social media erupted. It felt like betrayal on a level reality television had never shown. A man questioning the children he raised, the children who called him father, the children who trusted him, the children who never asked to be part of any of this. Then came the next wave. Old arguments resurfaced. Voice notes, text messages. They painted a darker picture of the marriage behind the scenes. Not explosive fights. Something far colder. Calculated remarks. Subtle comparisons. Quiet insults disguised as jokes. Emotional distance that grew over years, not days. It wasn't chaos. It was erosion. People who had once defended Todd started questioning the timeline. Why did the custody push begin only after the prenup challenge? Why did the DNA demand appear at the same time financial disclosures were required? Why did he repeat the pressure story so confidently when the video existed? How did he not remember what he'd said that night? It wasn't just contradiction, it was strategy exposed under daylight. Meanwhile, the blended family fractures grew sharper. Riley stopped holding back. Not online, not in private, not even in rooms where cameras weren't welcome. She didn't yell or scream, she just stated what she'd been holding for years. That Todd never treated her like his own. That he acted like a competitor for attention, not a father figure. That he undermined decisions. That he used her as a measuring stick against Kayla. That she felt like an outsider in a house that was supposed to feel safe. Kayla didn't stay silent either. She defended her father fiercely, insisting he was misunderstood, that he'd tried, that he wasn't given a real chance. but the bitterness in her voice said something the court didn't need transcripts to understand. Neither daughter felt protected. Neither felt prioritized. Neither felt like the adults in the house had ever chosen them over the battles they were fighting with each other. The judge had warned them earlier about stability, but stability had never been real. It was a performance for cameras, a facade for fans, a recycled storyline wrapped in positivity for television. Once the filing happened, the truth bled out like poison released from a cracked bottle. In the weeks following the finalized divorce, Todd became more combative than ever. Not publicly. He knew better than to give interviews. But behind closed doors, every decision he made hinted at a need to reclaim something he felt slipping. He challenged custody schedules. He questioned financial disclosures. He demanded access to documents he'd never cared about during the marriage. Every move felt less like parenting and more like retaliation. Kandi, on the other hand, did something nobody expected. She stopped responding. Not in court. Her lawyers handled everything with surgical precision, but emotionally she detached. For the first time in years, she wasn't debating, explaining, convincing, or defending. She was finished. Not with Todd, with the idea that the marriage ever had the stability the public imagined. The prenup video wasn't just evidence, it was a timestamp. Proof of when the truth stopped and the performance began. And then the internet did what the court never could. It exposed the pattern. Fans dug up old moments when Todd laughed about backup plans. They revisited the storyline about Mama Joyce calling him an opportunist. They replayed the reunion clip where Todd made comments about shared assets. They quoted scenes where he talked about deserving things. The puzzle pieces rearranged themselves into a truth everyone recognized, but nobody had admitted out loud for years. Not until now. The more people looked, the clearer it became. The prenup wasn't unfair. It was necessary. The custody fight wasn't about love. It was leverage. The pressure story wasn't trauma. It was tactic. The DNA request wasn't confusion. It was insult. The financial secrecy wasn't an accident. It was concealment. And when outsiders put all of it together, the image that once protected Todd shattered. He wasn't the blindsided husband. He wasn't the wounded partner. He wasn't the calm victim. He was the strategist who lost control of the narrative. The moment that video surfaced, everything tilted. The court no longer saw pressure. They saw preparation. The daughters no longer saw a father caught in conflict. They saw a man choosing battles over healing. The public no longer saw a couple trying to save a marriage. They saw two people who had been drowning in silence long before the filing ever happened. The finalized divorce wasn't closure. It was exposure. A reminder that some relationships don't break. They get unmasked. And this one wasn't unmasked gently. It was ripped open with evidence that left nothing to interpretation. The dust never settled. Even after the divorce was finalized, even after the judge stamped a file, even after the courtroom emptied, something in the air refused to quiet itself. The story didn't end when the marriage ended. It deepened, darkened, thickened into a fog that followed both of them long after the courtroom lights shut off. Because while most divorces stop at signatures, this one kept bleeding into spaces neither of them could control. People expected silence after the final judgment. A break, a pause, a moment where both sides stepped back to breathe. But the silence that came wasn't peaceful. It was tense, sharp, loaded. The kind of silence that means the real truth hasn't surfaced yet. Only the legal truth has. And legal truth is never the whole truth. In the weeks that followed, new details began surfacing from closed-door meetings that happened after the divorce was finalized. Not leaks, not scandals, just pieces of information slipping out through people who had seen too much to keep quiet. It became obvious that the final hearing had been just the climax. There was an entire collapse building between the lines. One insider revealed that right after the judge announced the divorce decision, Todd didn't leave the courtroom immediately. He stayed seated, staring at the table in front of him as if the verdict had sucked the air from his chest. Not because he wanted to save the marriage, but because he hadn't expected to lose the narrative so violently. The prenup video had shattered more than his case. It shattered the image he'd constructed for months. The image of a man who was pressured, ignored, pushed aside. The video erased that version of him in seconds. Kandi didn't look back at him once. Not when she stood. Not when she walked out. Not even when cameras chased her down the hallway. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't anger. It was a kind of grief that had turned numb, the kind that comes from realizing you spent years loving someone who was rehearsing an exit strategy while you were rehearsing forgiveness. But the outside world didn't move on quietly. The internet took the prenup clip and turned it into a weapon of truth. Every publication, every commentary channel, every gossip page broke down Todd's tone, his expression, his choice of words. They slowed the audio. They analyzed body language. They pointed out how calm he looked, how deliberate, how comfortable, how willing. Every frame of that video stood in direct opposition to everything he'd claimed under oath. And then came the next blow. A report showing that Todd had created financial ventures during the marriage that he never disclosed. Ventures listed privately. Ventures he allegedly protected more fiercely than he protected the family bond. The court documents didn't accuse him of fraud, but they didn't need to. The pattern spoke louder than accusations. As more information hit the timeline, the conversation shifted from shock to recognition. People began saying what Mama Joyce had said years earlier. He wasn't building a marriage, he was building a fallback plan. The kind that keeps someone comfortable even if the marriage doesn't survive. And once the internet adopted this interpretation, every old episode of every show they'd ever filmed together became evidence of something people swore they'd missed. Then the blended family tension resurfaced again. Riley didn't give interviews, but her social media activity said more than words ever could. She liked posts calling out manipulation. She shared indirect quotes about choosing loyalty. She posted lyrics about peace over chaos. Kayla responded indirectly too, posting cryptic messages about one-sided stories and outsiders who never understood their bond. The daughters weren't yelling at each other, but the distance between them grew into a public canyon. The next wave of shock came from something darker, something that hadn't been discussed openly in court but was whispered afterward. The emotional distance between Todd and the children during the final months of the marriage. Someone close to the family anonymously described moments where Todd seemed cold, detached, irritated by small things. Times when he dismissed needs. Times when he ignored excitement. Nothing illegal, nothing outwardly abusive, just hollow, heavy, absent. And people started piecing together how that might have fed into the judge's decision to leave the kids with Kandi. The DNA test request continued haunting everything. It wasn't just a question, it was a wound that wouldn't close. Fans couldn't comprehend why someone would demand something so extreme unless they were trying to shatter the other side psychologically. The court had dismissed it as irrelevant, but the public didn't. It became a symbol of how far the conflict had gone. A symbol of betrayal that even strangers could feel in their bones. And while social media tore him apart, Todd began retreating from public life, not disappearing, strategizing, not posting, watching. Every move he made looked like preparation for a comeback, not a recovery. He changed lawyers. He filed new motions. He reconsidered his approach to custody, not from love, but from something colder. Something that looked more like revenge than responsibility. Meanwhile, Kandi did the opposite. She poured energy into the children, into work, into routines, into appearing strong even when she wasn't. She didn't make grand statements. She didn't clap back online. She let the documents speak for her. She let the video speak for itself. She let Todd's actions collapse under their own weight. She didn't win because she fought harder. She won because she stopped fighting for someone who was fighting against her. But the most heartbreaking part came from whispers of what happened after the kids learned about the DNA request. A's, still too young to fully grasp it, sensed something was wrong. Blaze asked questions nobody wanted to answer. The divide wasn't just between parents, it seeped into the children's understanding of who they could trust. That part of the fallout didn't make headlines. It lived in closed rooms, in quiet nights, in the spaces between explanations. The cultural verdict grew sharper when people revisited how Todd had acted in earlier seasons. Earlier interviews, earlier red carpets. They saw the pattern for the first time. How often he talked about finances. How often he talked about power. How often he measured contribution. How often he framed decisions like transactions. The internet didn't just uncover a truth. They rewrote the entire narrative of the marriage through hindsight. And then came the revelation that ended every argument. The prenup had never threatened Todd until the divorce came into sight. That's when he challenged it. That's when he called it unfair. That's when he questioned its validity. If he truly believed he'd been pressured, he would have said something years earlier. The silence was the evidence. The timing was the confession. In the end, this story wasn't about who hurt whom the most. It wasn't about who fought hardest. It wasn't about who cried, who stayed, who left. It was about intention. And intention shows itself in the moments people don't think will be revealed. The truth didn't come out in outbursts. It didn't come out in arguments. It didn't come out in emotional scenes filmed for television. It came out in a video. Recorded quietly, without drama, without fear. A video that showed someone agreeing to something they later swore they were forced into. A video that destroyed everything built in court. A video that proved the marriage wasn't attacked by betrayal. It was corroded by motive. The divorce wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy was realizing how long the truth had been hiding. Here's what nobody wants to face. When the court doors closed and the final judgment hit the record, nothing about this story truly ended. The papers only confirmed what had already been destroyed, and every silent moment afterward carried a weight louder than any argument ever filmed. You watched a marriage collapse in public. But what crumbled behind the scenes was far more unsettling. Trust didn't break overnight. Love didn't disappear in a single hearing. What shattered everything was intention exposed under the brightest possible light. The video that surfaced didn't just contradict a claim, it dismantled a strategy. The custody demands weren't expressions of devotion. They were positions on a battlefield. The DNA request wasn't confusion. It was a cut meant to bleed. Every move made after the filing revealed a story that had been forming quietly in the shadows. And once the truth finally stepped forward, the mask could never return to place. So here's the question left hanging in the aftermath. What happens now? What becomes of a future shaped by legal scars and emotional debris? How do children grow inside a narrative they never chose but will eventually uncover? This isn't about gossip anymore. It's about consequence. It's about recognizing how quickly affection can transform into leverage when the foundation beneath it was never steady enough to hold. If you think this ends with a signature, you're missing the real impact. Court rulings finalize documents, not damage. The next chapter won't unfold in hearings. It will unfold in routines, in choices, in truths that surface long after the cameras move on. Stories like this don't fade. They echo, because when a truth this heavy finally escapes, it doesn't vanish into silence. It lingers, reshaping every memory, every motive, every version of events people once believed.